The early morning sun had just started spilling its golden light across the neat sidewalks and manicured lawns of Cedar Grove Estates. It was the kind of suburban calm that most parents cherished, until today. Mark adjusted the collar of his jacket and watched from the driveway as his 8-year-old son, Jamie, waited patiently at the bus stop, backpack slung over one shoulder. Mark wasn't just any parent in this neighborhood. He was the police chief of the city, a man used to command and control, but here, in this perfectly ordered bubble of the HOA's domain, his authority was invisible. Or so he thought. Suddenly, sharp footsteps clicked purposefully on the pavement. Karen appeared like a storm cloud on the horizon, her face tight, eyes cold with that familiar brand of self-righteousness. She was the HOA's notorious enforcer, feared by neighbors for her relentless policing of every minor rule, and today her target was Jamie. "What are you doing standing there like you own the place?" Karen's voice was sharp and loud enough for the other parents nearby to stop and stare. "You know that bus stop is not a hangout spot for kids without permission." Jamie's eyes dropped to the ground. "I'm waiting for the bus," he said softly. Karen leaned closer, her tone slicing through the quiet morning air. "Well, waiting for the bus doesn't mean you get to linger and talk with other kids. You're disturbing the neighborhood." "Peace!" Mark's jaw tightened. He clenched his fists, the familiar urge to step in rising in him, but he held back. Letting Karen make a scene in public was his first instinct. After all, she was harassing his son. But Mark was also a strategist, a man who knew when to act and when to observe. From his driveway, Mark could see the bus stop crowd growing uneasy. Other kids fidgeted nervously, and a few parents exchanged worried glances. Karen wasn't just confronting Jamie, she was sending a message. To the child. Yes, but to everyone. "Jamie, why don't you go home until the bus arrives?" Karen demanded. "You're making people uncomfortable." Jamie looked up, eyes wide and uncertain. I have to wait here." Karen's lips curled into a cruel smile. "That's not my problem. This is a neighborhood with rules and you'd better learn them." Mark finally moved, stepping onto the sidewalk, voice calm but firm. "Karen, that's enough." Karen turned to face him, eyes narrowing. "Oh, Chief, didn't realize you lived here." Mark's gaze hardened. "I do. And you'll treat my son with respect," Karen scoffed, folding her arms. "Respect? Respect is earned in Cedar Grove. You might be police chief, but here, the HOA rules are what keep this place safe." The tension between them crackled like electricity. Neighbors held their breath. No one had ever seen Karen confront someone like this before. Usually, her bullying went unchallenged. Mark's mind raced. He could hear the bus approaching in the distance. The moment of truth was coming. Would Karen escalate? Would she drag this confrontation into a full-blown neighborhood war? "Listen," Mark said quietly. "I don't want trouble, but if you keep harassing my kid, it won't end well." Karen's smile twisted, almost amused. "Big talk from a cop. Let's see if you can back it up." The bus rounded the corner with a rumble, pulling to a stop. Jamie stepped forward hesitantly. Karen took a step back, satisfied for now, but clearly simmering with resentment. Mark knelt to his son's level, voice low and reassuring. "You're safe. I've got your back." But as the bus doors closed behind Jamie, Mark couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Karen had lit a fuse, and the neighborhood was about to explode. The morning's confrontation lingered in Mark's mind like a low thunder rumble on a clear day. He couldn't shake the sharpness of Karen's voice, the coldness in her eyes. As police chief, he was used to facing threats head-on, but Karen wasn't an ordinary adversary. She wielded a different kind of power, the slow, suffocating grip of the HOA's rules and whispered alliances. Mark stood by his kitchen window, watching the street where his son's school bus had disappeared. Neighbors were beginning their daily routines, but something felt off. Quiet, tense, like the calm before a storm. Then the message arrived. A plain white envelope slid under his front door. No stamp, no return address. Mark's fingers tightened around the envelope before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed but unsigned. "Back off. Some rules don't bend, even for you." His pulse quickened. This wasn't a friendly warning. It was a threat. But from whom? Karen had made no secret of her dislike for him, but she had never stooped to anonymous intimidation before. Mark's phone buzzed. It was Jamie. "Dad." Jamie's voice trembled slightly. "Karen was at the bus stop again today. She told me she's watching me." Mark's jaw clenched. "Did you say anything back?" "No, I just wanted to get on the bus and go home." Mark's protective instinct flared hotter than ever. But as police chief, he knew he needed a plan more than a confrontation. Karen was playing a psychological game. Slow, deliberate, meant to wear them down. Over the next few days, Mark began quietly observing Karen from a distance. She moved through the neighborhood like a shadow, slipping into conversations with other parents, her gaze sharp and calculating. He noticed the subtle ways she isolated families who didn't toe the line. A cold word here, a pointed look there. In the local grocery store, Mark overheard a conversation between Karen and a fellow HOA board member. Her voice was low but fierce. "They need to learn their place," Karen said. "The neighborhood has standards. If the chief thinks he's untouchable, he's wrong." Mark's blood ran cold. Karen wasn't just harassing his family. She was rallying forces against him. That night, Mark sat at his kitchen table going through HOA meeting minutes and complaint filings. Patterns emerged. Karen had pushed for fines and penalties on several families for trivial infractions. A few residents had quietly moved away, unable to bear her relentless scrutiny. He realized something chilling. Karen wasn't just enforcing rules. She was building power, one intimidation at a time. His phone lit up again. A neighbor, hesitant, but concerned, sent him a text. "Karen's been asking questions about your department. Something about cleaning house. Be careful." Mark felt the weight of the unseen battle closing in. Was Karen trying to dig up dirt on him? To what end? He glanced at the family photo on the fridge. Jamie's bright smile, his wife's gentle face, and a new resolve took hold. This wasn't just about neighborhood rules anymore. It was about protecting everything he held dear. The next morning, as Mark drove Jamie to school himself, bypassing the bus stop for now, his phone buzzed with another anonymous text. Some rules come with consequences. Choose wisely. Mark swallowed hard, eyes fixed on the road ahead. The quiet storm Karen had unleashed was growing into a tempest, and the first strike was yet to come. Mark sat at his desk late into the night, the dim glow of the lamp casting long shadows across the scattered HOA documents. Every page seemed to deepen the mystery. Petty fines, anonymous complaints, and a pattern of ruthless enforcement, all pointing back to Karen. But it wasn't just rules she cared about. It was control. The more Mark dug, the more he saw the cracks beneath Cedar Grove's pristine surface. Karen wasn't merely a stickler for regulations. She was a strategist, methodically isolating anyone who dared challenge her. A sudden knock at the door jolted him. He wasn't expecting anyone this late. Cautiously, he opened it to find Lisa, a neighbor from across the street, a quiet woman who rarely involved herself in neighborhood politics. "Mark," she whispered urgently, glancing over her shoulder. "You need to be careful. Karen's been watching you, and she's talking to the HOA board about you." Mark invited her in, sensing the gravity in her voice. "What do you mean?" Lisa hesitated, then leaned in. "She's convinced some on the board that you're abusing your position as police chief to intimidate neighbors. There are whispers that you've been using your badge to skirt HOA rules." Mark's brow furrowed. This was more than just petty neighbor drama. Karen was building a case against him, weaponizing rumors and half-truths. He realized then that Karen's war wasn't just against his family. It was against him personally, aiming to dismantle his reputation. The next afternoon, Mark ran into Karen at the local grocery store. She was with a small group of board members, her posture smug and confident. The air between them crackled with unspoken threats. "Chief," Karen greeted him with a tight smile. "I hope you're ready for the HOA meeting next week. We have a lot to discuss, including your family's compliance with neighborhood rules." Mark's voice was steady. "I'll be there, and I'll bring facts, not rumors." Karen's smile faded for a split second before she masked it with icy composure. "Facts are relative, Mark, especially when the community's peace is at stake." As Mark walked away, a cold chill crept down his spine. Karen wasn't just planning to humiliate him. She was preparing to use the HOA's power to force his family out. That night, Mark found another unsettling surprise. His home security footage had been tampered with, timestamps missing, cameras offline during the most vulnerable hours. Whoever was behind it knew exactly what they were doing. He called in a favor from a trusted colleague at the department to discreetly investigate. The question burned. Was Karen connected to this? Was this intimidation now crossing into illegal territory? Meanwhile, Karen's subtle campaign against Mark intensified. She cornered Jamie again, this time whispering threats about what happens to families who don't fit in. Jamie's growing fear gnawed at Mark's heart, fueling his determination. One evening, Mark caught sight of Karen speaking on the phone outside the HOA office. Her voice dropped to a harsh whisper as she said, "The chief underestimates us. We need to tighten the noose." Mark's blood ran cold. The noose wasn't just metaphorical. He was up against a force that was organizing and ready to strike. In the silence of his study, Mark made a decision. This fight wouldn't be won by quiet observation anymore. It was time to step into the light and confront the growing threat head-on. But as he prepared for the upcoming HOA showdown, a nagging question lingered. How deep did Karen's network go? And what dark secrets was she hiding that could destroy not just him, but the entire community? The storm was no longer just brewing, it was gathering strength, ready to break. Mark's phone buzzed relentlessly throughout the day. Texts, calls, anonymous tips, the pressure was mounting like a noose tightening around his neck. Karen's campaign wasn't just a neighborhood nuisance anymore, it was a calculated assault on his family's life and his career. That morning, an official-looking letter arrived in the mail. It was a formal complaint from the HOA board demanding that Mark's family pay hefty fines for multiple violations, unauthorized yard decorations, improper trash disposal, and even Jamie's backpack allegedly blocking the sidewalk at the bus stop. The letter was precise, cold, and designed to intimidate. Mark stared at the envelope, his jaw clenched. The message was clear. Get out, or face the consequences. He knew Karen was behind this. She had orchestrated the complaint to strip away their sense of belonging, to make them outsiders in their own home. Mark's wife, Emily, stood beside him, worry etched across her face. "What are we going to do?" "We fight," Mark said, voice low but fierce. "We can't let her win." Over the next days, Karen's campaign escalated further. She rallied the HOA board to pass stricter enforcement measures, including daily patrols to monitor suspicious activity. Cameras appeared on street corners, but their angles were suspiciously focused on Mark's house and the bus stop where Jamie waited. Neighbors started whispering. Some sided with Karen's vision of order, praising her for protecting property values and neighborhood standards. Others, quietly afraid, kept their distance, unwilling to get caught in the crossfire. Mark felt the neighborhood fracturing. Friends avoided him at the grocery store. Jamie's playdates dwindled. The isolation was almost worse than the harassment itself. Then came the day Jamie disappeared. It was just after school, the golden light of late afternoon slipping through the trees. Emily called Mark in a panic. Jamie hadn't come home. The bus driver confirmed Jamie had gotten off at the usual stop, but no one saw him walk home. Mark's heart pounded as he raced outside, searching the streets, calling his son's name. Panic clawed at him, cold and relentless. After nearly an hour, Jamie appeared from around the corner, eyes wide and frightened but unharmed. "Where were you?" Mark asked, pulling him close. Jamie swallowed hard. I was scared. I saw Karen's car parked near the bus stop. She was watching me. I ran and hid in Mrs. Parker's yard." Mark's blood ran cold. Karen had crossed a line, determined. Mark called a trusted friend in the police department to review Karen's vehicle registrations and movements. The findings were damning. Karen's car had been spotted multiple times near the bus stop and Mark's house at odd hours. That night, Mark sat with Emily, his mind racing. This was no longer about petty HOA disputes. It was stalking. Harassment had become a dangerous game. But Karen's shadow loomed even larger. The HOA board was preparing for the next big meeting, the battleground where Mark would either reclaim his family's peace or lose everything. As Mark prepared his evidence and gathered support from neighbors quietly disillusioned with Karen's reign, he couldn't shake one chilling thought. Karen wasn't done. She was just warming up. The storm was breaking, and Mark was standing in its eye. The day after Jamie's disappearance shook the neighborhood. Cedar Grove Estates felt different, fractured, raw, and fragile. Conversations in front yards turned to whispers behind closed doors. Faces that once wore smiles now held suspicion, fear, or silence. Mark sat in his home office, his police chief badge resting beside the stack of HOA paperwork. The official complaints, the anonymous threats, the surveillance footage tampered with, it all pointed to something deeper than a neighborhood feud. But what? The neighborhood had a secret. Mark was sure of it now. Late that afternoon, a small group of neighbors arrived at Mark's door, each looking nervous but resolute. Lisa, the quiet woman who had warned him before, was the first to speak. "We're tired," she said, voice trembling. "Karen's controlling everything, but it's worse than you know. There's corruption in the HOA, bribes, threats, even falsified records." Another neighbor, Tom, stepped forward. "Several families have been pushed out under suspicious circumstances. Karen's been the one orchestrating it all. She's not just a bully, she's cleaning house." Mark's heart pounded. The quiet storm he had sensed was now a full-blown tempest. Karen's campaign of control wasn't limited to petty fines and harassment. It was a calculated effort to take over the entire community. But who was backing her? The HOA board seemed complicit, yet afraid. And the whispered threats Mark had been receiving now made sense. They were part of a larger scheme. That night, Mark reviewed the anonymous video that had surfaced a few days earlier. It showed Karen meeting with an unknown man in a dark parking lot, exchanging what looked like an envelope. The video was grainy, but the message was clear. Karen was connected to people outside Cedar Grove with power and influence Mark hadn't anticipated. His phone buzzed. Another anonymous tip. "Watch your back, Chief. You're poking into things that don't want to be found." Mark leaned back, eyes closing for a moment. This was no longer just about protecting his son or fighting an overzealous HOA member. This was a fight for the soul of the neighborhood, and maybe his own safety. As the sun set behind the trees lining Cedar Grove's streets, Mark realized the battle ahead would be harder and darker than he'd ever imagined. Karen's grip on Cedar Grove was tightening, and to break free, Mark would have to expose every secret and face enemies hidden in plain sight. Mark's resolve hardened. He couldn't let Karen's shadow choke the life out of Cedar Grove any longer. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't just about rules or neighborhood politics anymore. It was about justice. That evening, Mark reviewed the grainy footage once more, zooming in on the face of the man meeting Karen. Something about his posture, the quick glances around the parking lot, sparked a distant memory. He had seen this man before, at a city council meeting, a quiet observer with connections rumored to stretch into business and politics. Mark decided to dig deeper. Using contacts within the police department's cyber division, he requested discreet surveillance on Karen and her associates. The department moved cautiously. Karen wasn't just an HOA troublemaker, she was connected to powerful players who could make trouble for the city's leadership. Days passed with quiet tension. Mark stayed vigilant, balancing his roles as police chief, father, and neighborhood defender. Meanwhile, Karen seemed to sense the tightening noose. She escalated her intimidation tactics, anonymous letters left on doorsteps, strange noises, outside Mark's home at night, even a broken window one cold morning. The neighborhood was on edge. Parents kept their children indoors. Friendships frayed, and a sense of paranoia seeped into the once peaceful streets. Then, the tipping point came. At the weekly HOA meeting, tensions exploded. Karen took the floor first, her voice dripping with false concern. This community must maintain its standards. We cannot allow lawlessness or disrespect to fester, no matter who you are. Mark stood to respond, his voice steady but commanding. This isn't about lawlessness. It's about protecting our families from harassment and intimidation. The evidence I've collected shows a pattern of abuse of power within the HOA, led by you, Karen. Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's eyes narrowed, but Mark pressed on, presenting the tampered security footage, the anonymous threats, and the suspicious activity tied to Karen's car. The room was divided. Some neighbors looked shocked. Others whispered doubts. But then Lisa and Tom stood up, voicing their support for Mark and confirming the corruption rumors. Karen's facade cracked, revealing a glimpse of desperation. "You're spreading lies," she hissed. "You're trying to ruin this community for your own gain." Mark shook his head. "No, Karen. I'm trying to save it." Just as the debate reached a fever pitch, Mark's phone buzzed. He glanced down. It was an alert from the cyber division. New footage, caught just last night. Mark played the video on the big screen. It showed Karen meeting the same man from before, this time exchanging documents with an unmistakable signature from a shady local developer notorious for illegal zoning deals. The implication was clear. Karen was helping outsiders gain control over Cedar Grove's land and assets, threatening the neighborhood's future. The room fell silent. Karen's expression twisted with rage, but her allies looked away, suddenly, uncertain. Mark seized the moment. "This community deserves transparency. We'll be launching a full investigation with the city. The days of fear and intimidation end now." As the meeting adjourned, Mark saw neighbors approach him, some with relief, others with lingering fear. The battle was far from over, but the tide had turned. Driving home later, Mark caught a glimpse of a car slowing near his house, Karen's. She watched from behind the windshield, eyes blazing with fury. Mark felt the weight of the coming storm, but he also felt ready. The fight to reclaim Cedar Grove was entering its final, most dangerous phase. Mark couldn't shake the feeling that Karen was closing in on him. Every glance over his shoulder, every shadow at the edge of his vision seemed like a warning. The fight had escalated beyond HOA meetings and neighborhood gossip. It was personal. Late, one evening, Mark's phone buzzed again. An unknown number sent a message. "Stop digging or you'll regret it. Last chance." Mark's fingers trembled for a moment before he typed back, "I'm not scared of you." The reply came almost instantly. "Good. You'll need that courage." The next morning, Mark found a note taped to his front door. "Meet me at the old community center at 9 p.m. Alone." He knew it was Karen. That night, Mark arrived at the dilapidated community center, its boarded windows and faded paint casting eerie shadows. Inside, Karen waited, calm but icy. "So, Chief," she said, voice low and mocking, You've made quite a mess." Mark stood firm. "It's over, Karen. The community knows what you're doing." Karen's smile was cold. "You think you've won? You're just a man fighting ghosts." Suddenly the lights flickered, and the sound of footsteps echoed in the hall. Mark's hand instinctively moved to his jacket where he kept his badge and phone. "You're outnumbered," Karen said, her eyes gleaming. From the shadows stepped two men, tall, menacing figures who clearly weren't ordinary neighbors. Mark recognized one instantly, the man from the video, the shady developer connected to Karen. Mark's heart pounded. He was in the lion's den. "I'll give you one chance," the developer said. "Back off, or this neighborhood and your career will be finished." Mark's mind raced. He reached for his phone but realized Karen had cut the power, plunging the room into near darkness. Suddenly, a light flickered on, a flashlight beam cutting through the gloom. Police officers poured into the room, their badges gleaming. "Mark." "We got your call," one officer said, moving to detain the men. Karen's face paled as the plan unraveled. "You set me up!" she screamed. Mark stepped forward, voice steady. "No, Karen, you set yourself up with your greed and threats." The officers cuffed the developer and his associate, leading them out. Karen, cornered and defeated, was left alone in the silence. Mark's phone buzzed again, text from an anonymous number. "This isn't the end." He looked at Karen, whose glare burned with fury, then at the officers securing the scene. "Maybe not," Mark said quietly, "but it's a start." The courtroom was packed. The trial against Karen and the developer was underway, and the small community of Cedar Grove Estates watched closely. For weeks, the evidence Mark had gathered, tampered footage, threats, secret deals, was laid bare, exposing the rot beneath the neighborhood's polished facade. Karen sat at the defense table, her composure cracked but her eyes burning with defiance. Mark observed her silently, knowing this chapter was closing, but sensing there was more lurking beneath the surface. The prosecution's case was airtight. Witnesses testified about Karen's relentless harassment, the intimidation of neighbors, and the developer's illegal plans to buy and reshape the community for profit. But then came a surprising twist. During cross-examination, Karen's attorney revealed a series of encrypted emails found on Karen's computer, emails from an unknown sender with a warning, "You're in too deep. Pull back or risk everything." Mark's pulse quickened as the court heard how Karen had been blackmailed for months, forced into a dangerous game with powerful figures far beyond the HOA. The anonymous sender wasn't just a threat. They were pulling Karen's strings, turning her into a pawn. After the session, Mark met quietly with his trusted team. "This changes everything," he said. "There's someone above Karen, someone we haven't uncovered yet." Back in Cedar Grove, the neighborhood began to heal. Families came out of their shells, children played freely at the bus stop again, and a new HOA board was elected, one focused on transparency and community, not control. Mark's role as police chief was celebrated quietly. His family regained their peace, though Jamie still eyed the bus stop with a wary caution. But one evening, as Mark closed up his office, a plain envelope slid under the door caught his eye. Inside was a single card with one word, "Watch." Mark smiled grimly. The fight for Cedar Grove might have paused, but the shadows still lingered. And so did the question, who was really behind the curtain?